Right. Now, at the last council meeting, I asked a question to Councillor Smart concerning the possibility of whether the administration supports the building of a northern road. Now, as I've done before, I'm doing it this time. I'm stealing some clips from Ipswich Spy, so you can actually see what happened. Okay, and here is the question and answer to Councillor Smart.
Does the second station support the building of a northern road?
I'm sure it's, Mr. Mayor, it's inevitable that many new roads will be built as part of the Ipswich suburb, which is the main subject of this evening's business. I'm assuming that the questioner is referring to the potential for an urban bypass of the town, and the council position on this is set out in paragraph 8.235 of our adopted core strategy, which states that we believe this is something that certainly should be investigated. Recent discussions with the county council, the police and crime commissioner, suggest that they are in favour of such investigations, and this is something which they're prepared to lead.
You supplement. No, just need to thank you very much. That brings us to the end of questions.
Now, the supplementary that I was intending to ask was, when was the last time you liaised with the relevant portfolio holder on Suffolk County Council? I was going to ask this knowing that he hasn't spoken to, or hadn't spoken to Councillor Newman for some time. But based on his answer to my initial question, I could discern that he was going to basically repeat himself about talks with the county councillor, and so I really, didn't see the point in asking a question I knew the answer for. Now, on Ipswich Spy's website today, there is an article titled "Suffolk Conservatives are getting behind plans for a northern route." Now, apparently, according to the article, Councillor Graham Newman, Suffolk Cabinet Minister, Cabinet Member for Roads and Transport and all that lot, has announced this morning that he has tasked officers with looking at options for a new northern route around Ipswich in response to the development north and east of Ipswich. He said, "In looking to the future, when even more development may come forward here and to the east of Ipswich, I have asked officers to embark on a piece of work to consider options for potential new highway capacity to the north of Ipswich. It is clear that funding for a scheme is some way off, but I want to make sure that we are in the strongest possible position to put the case when funding opportunities that arise." Ben Gummers commented on traffic issues in Ipswich, highlighting that the wet dock crossing proposal, part of the Enterprise Island Plan, is outlined 2 weeks ago and supporting it. The thing is, I mean, if I see, I said my question was about a northern road. If you say a northern bypass, they immediately presume that you are talking about a road of the same standard as the A14 to the west and south of Ipswich, which I actually don't think that is what is required. A road of the standard of what us Ipswich people call the bypass, which was the bypass before the A14 went round town. I mean, the Valley Road culture, a road of that quality to the north of Ipswich would probably be. I mean, we don't need flyovers and interchanges and the like. We just need something to get traffic across the north of Ipswich, so it's not actually having to come in. The funding for that is considerably less, but that would actually still be a bypass. It just wouldn't be of the same standard as the one which takes traffic to Felixstowe. There was a lot of stuff. Well, basically, it's when they actually gave the go-ahead for the Ipswich Gardens suburb at that full council meeting. It's the only one they've had since May. They obviously don't believe in democracy. I mean, if the Tories had this few council meetings, they'd be complaining. But they're not bothered. Anyway, I'm now going to hand you over to Councillor Jones.
Understand the situation. A vote in favour of this SPD helps us to control the development of Northern Ipswich and ensure we create a successful new community. A vote against would set us on the road to an unplanned, uncoordinated mishmash where we will be picking up the pieces for decades.
Right, so they don't want an unplanned mishmash. So to avoid an unplanned mishmash, they've come up with a planned mishmash instead. Now, originally the plans for the development to the north of Ipswich were good, with quality housing. But Ipswich Labour, being Ipswich Labour, who won't do anything that isn't for party political reasons, have actually made what was a good proposal for a good development to be, quite frankly, crap. And so this is the issue. And basically, they are. It's not in a cheap part of town, but they want cheap housing there. And the reason they want cheap housing is to actually have no investment in Ipswich. They don't like people with money buy expensive houses, and they may invest in Ipswich, and they do not want any investment in Ipswich. They want it to be a rundown, ruinous mess to make people more inclined to vote Labour so they can keep it a rundown, ruinous mess. And so they have actually made a good development, which is, as the Northern Fringe was, into an absolute rubbish mishmash of a development, which is unsuitable for party political reasons. Right, now I'm going to hand this you. Here's what Councillor Chenty had to say.
We welcome the inclusion of our submission into the papers and also appreciate the officer's time and continuing to report together. I disagree that the responses received by residents, groups and TAL show that there remains a significant degree of opposition to the principle of the development as stated in this report. If anything, they show a genuine endeavour to get what is best for Ipswich in terms of exceptional quality, sufficient infrastructure and community resources. Ipswich Conservatives believe in the need for housing. That is why the Conservative-led Council delivered thousands of new homes to people who live and work in Ipswich. A policy which, by the way, produced more social housing in each year than Labour has in the 3 years since they have been running this council. The last Labour government allowed house building to fall to levels unseen since the 1920s, but work done by Conservatives in this government has seen a turnaround, and we're slowly beginning to increase the number of homes being built, but there is still a long way to go. Just because we need new homes doesn't mean we shouldn't demand the same levels of quality that we would want in our own home. It doesn't mean we shouldn't demand a road infrastructure designed to complement and improve the existing network. It doesn't mean we shouldn't demand homes that are well built to a level of design quality that certainly seems to be missing from Labour's plan. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't expect the detailed work in Labour's plan to have been done with reference to the lay of the land. On road infrastructure, we're concerned that Labour's plan appears to repeat mistakes of the past. You only have to speak to people on Ravenswood to understand what a huge mistake they are making by forcing a single entrance to the new site. It is a disgrace that the traffic surveys are carried out during school holidays and on nightly traffic evenings, and at the very least we need to show residents of Ipswich that solutions are being informed by reliable information. Only this will build pressure on government to provide funding opportunities for building of a northern route to alleviate traffic. And yes, we need a northern relief road. Traffic assessments by Suffolk County Council show higher trip rates than those assumed by the developer's planning application. This is an example of Labour's lack of consultation and alignment with Suffolk County Council. Although the County Council are being consulted at the earlier stages on the strategic level, they have not been consulted on the details within Labour's plan. Specifically, they would like to see exceptional cycle connections, a desire shared by those of us in the Conservative group. It is important to remember that Section 106 money needs to be spent on transport options, not just council houses, as seems to be the trend for this Labour Council. I'm sure councillors of Smart will agree with me that bus provision must be exemplar and lessons must be learned from Labour's broken up bus promises for Ravenswood. We are concerned that the quality of the housing will be a cut and paste of other developments in this town. Unless they are told otherwise, developers will build what they deem most profitable, and we do not see anything in Labour's plan that suggests what we could term it as quality housing. In Labour's plan, the word quality is just a platitude and can be interpreted in many ways. We are still of the opinion that it requires more deliberate statements to inform developers prior to their submissions. Surely we should be aspiring and confident, not taking a defeated stance that we can't attract buyers with limited architectural design. Isn't this our moment to help enhance Ipswich and our opportunity to take it? Or perhaps attracting middle-income professional families likely to go Tory or Liberal is not what the Labour administration wants to do. Finally, Mr Mayor, I turn to the lay of the land. The point made by Gwen Borough Executive has been completely lost on this Labour Council. Let me address it again. Labour's plan doesn't have a proper topological study of the site. Where is the understanding of the natural drainage, the use of the undulating countryside in a way sympathetic to the site? Because of the lack of proper studies of the site, there are still concerns that potential threats of flooding have not been properly addressed. According to Mr Gunn, an independent landscape architect, the slopes of the topography need a relook. That surely is not too much to ask. With any project, one must always start with the end in mind. This is where successful mistakes are made and impact generations to come. This document is as important as it gets for future amendments to take place that do not have unintended consequences. I conclude by reiterating that we want to work with the administration, not against, and we offer our assistance. My group wants to support this scheme. Unlike the council leader, we're not trying to draw false dividing lines in order to win an election. This decision will be remembered for many years to come, and we must not be rushed by developers. It is far too important for that. Labour's plan is substandard. It won't produce the quality development that Ipswich deserves, and this council should be regained. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, that was good, quite right. Now, see, all the Conservatives and Lib Dem councillors were being sensible and basically giving valid objections, and all the Labour councillors were actually coming out with all this kind of thing as if the Tories and the Lib Dems don't support housing and all this nonsense. But anyway, here is a line from Councillor Moles.
On which there hasn't been too much discussion today, and that is the question of housing. There's a need for more houses in Ipswich now, right now, and it is right at the top.
Yeah, that'll be because your party in government didn't build enough houses then, John. See, Councillor Moles has been a bit, he's saying there's a need for housing. He's right, because the last Labour government weren't building houses. I mean, one of the reasons obviously they weren't building them was because they wanted to keep people sweet who lived in key marginals. That certain type of middle class person in key marginals who, they wanted to keep them sweet to get them to vote Labour. And so there is a shortage of housing, and this government is doing something about it. They are allowing councils to build council houses, and Ipswich Labour quite like to talk about how they're building council houses, but they don't like talking about the fact that it's this government that's allowing them to do it. It's the Conservative Party that are dealing with the housing shortage created by rubbish policies of the last Labour government. Right, now let's hear from the bloke who wants to be our local MP.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have for some time been trying to discern what the local Conservative Party policy on housing is. I've got to say, following tonight's contributions, I am none the wiser. What do they actually want? They claim to support building council houses, but they oppose nearly every scheme we put forward. They oppose the development of 100% council housing at Ravenswood, but put out leaflets claiming credit for 100% council housing at Bailey Close. They want housing at St Clements to be sped up, but for it also to be a country park with no housing at all. And this confusion extends to the development of North Ipswich. When Conservatives and Liberal Democrats ran this council, they agreed to designate this land for housing. Now they don't run the council, they either oppose it or they seek to put obstacles in its path. When this SPD was discussed at executive, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Gentry and Ben Gunn, our MP, indicated that they welcomed it and only wanted a few minor changes. The main sticking points there.
No, we want quality housing for our quality town, which Ipswich Labour are running down and turning it into a ruinous mess on purpose to make people more inclined to vote Labour, because they are only capable of doing things for party political reasons. Ipswich Labour are running this place down. I mean, that is why the town centre is getting full of pound shops and bookies. I mean, bookies and pound shops show up in towns that are being run down, and Ipswich is being run down by the Ipswich Labour because they are absolutely clueless. They want Ipswich to be a run-down, ruinous mess to make people despair and more inclined to vote Labour, because they can claim that they will be the saviours. They see that they claim to represent the poor, and the problem is, if you claim to represent people with bugger all, your customers are people with nothing, and so you can't actually do anything for the people with nothing, because if they end up not having nothing, then they're no longer going to be your customers. So basically, they're marketing people who have nothing. Their market is to people who have nothing. And then once they have to keep them, they can't help them have anything. Otherwise, well, they can't carry on marketing to them. So it's kind of, they cannot actually, socialism, for it to survive, has to fail. And that is why it does. Because if socialism was a success, there would be no need for socialism. There would be no, the ideology would fall apart. And see, socialism doesn't, and Labour are socialists, and they have to actually fail the people they claim to represent so that they can claim to represent them. It's a vicious circle between, you know, where basically you make people poor and vulnerable so you can claim to be on their side, and you can't help them, because if they stop being poor and vulnerable, you can't claim to be on their side. So it's an absolute vicious circle. So David Ellesmere was disliked saying it, but the thing, see, they want cheap rubbish housing, not quality housing, and that is the thing, because they want people who are more likely to vote Labour, and they don't want anyone with money to move into Ipswich, because they might use their money to invest in Ipswich, create business opportunities, aspiration, enterprise, etc., and they just don't want it. You see, they want Ipswich to fail. And the reason the Conservatives in Ipswich and the Lib Dems as well are against, well, well, it's gone through because they have plenty of lobby fodder on the council to get things through. The reason the Conservatives and the Lib Dems voted against it is because they do not want Ipswich to fail. They want Ipswich to prosper, and that's something Ipswich Labour doesn't want Ipswich to do.